Young woman Emily thought she found the perfect man. Daniel was charming, successful, but her mother warned her, and she wouldn't listen. But the visit to her future in-laws became a horrifying nightmare. When a 10-year-old child was brutally tortured by Daniel's family for just stealing a few pears, ear-pulling, beating, even planning to strip him for punishment. Emily was shocked when she witnessed the true evil nature of her boyfriend and his family. Will she have the courage to break everything and save the child from these monsters? The truth about Daniel will make you shiver. Emily stood at the door of her mother's flat, her heart pounding in her chest. Beside her, looking sharp and sophisticated, was Daniel. His presence at the threshold of her childhood home filled Emily with a strange, trembling anticipation. This was at a pivotal moment. Today, her mother would meet her fiancé for the first time, and Emily desperately wanted everything to go perfectly. She smoothed her hair, took a deep breath, and reached out to press the doorbell. Daniel intercepted her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze before lightly pressing the bell himself. A moment later, the door swung open. Her mother stood there, momentarily caught off guard. A smile of pleasant surprise lit up her face as she took in Emily, radiant, and the elegant man beside her. A brief, inevitable hesitation followed. Daniel, usually so confident, seemed slightly flustered, and her mother seemed to search for the right words to invite them in. This fleeting awkwardness only added to the moment's warmth and sincerity. "Mom, this is Daniel. You know, I've told you about him," Emily said. "Pleased to meet you," Daniel added smoothly. Come in, both of you." Finally regaining her composure, her mother stepped aside, ushering them into the flat. They walked into the kitchen, where a kettle was already whistling, filling the air with a fragrant aroma, and a golden, still warm apple pie sat waiting on the table. Yet, for the moment, food was the last thing on anyone's mind. Emily, overwhelmed with nerves and the desire to make a good impression, sat almost pressed against Daniel on the chair, as if seeking reassurance in his presence. The conversation started easily. With her characteristic tact, her mother asked about Daniel's job, his interests. Daniel was impeccable. He spoke with confidence, describing his work, emphasizing the importance of a strong family and a comfortable home. He mentioned how his family's success was the result of his parents' hard work, stressing the value of thrift and sensible financial management. At one point, when her mother asked about his vision for the future with Emily, Daniel looked at Emily, then back at her mother, and with a subtle smile, added, "The key is to ensure all affairs are meticulously managed. Only then can happiness and prosperity be guaranteed." Emily's eyes never left him. She hung on his every word, nodding in agreement. When Daniel paused to gather his thoughts, Emily quickly jumped in, adding a necessary word or phrase to keep the conversation flowing. She was doing everything she could to ensure this meeting was perfect and that her mother would be utterly charmed by her choice. They didn't stay long, just about an hour, as they were heading to the cinema afterwards. Bidding farewell, Daniel went out to the car first. Emily lingered in the hallway to hug her mother. Her mother looked slightly unsettled, her usual liveliness replaced by an inward focus. Emily kissed her cheek and whispered, holding her breath, "Well, what do you think, Mum? He's wonderful, isn't he?" Her mother sighed slowly, patted her daughter's hand, and replied softly, almost regretfully, "Listen, darling, I don't think he's the one for you." Later that evening, Emily and her mother sat in the kitchen, sipping tea with honey as always. But now, a palpable tension hung in the air. The half-eaten apple pie sat on their plates. Emily's mood was soured by her mother's words, and she couldn't shake them off. "Mom, why did you say that?" Emily's voice trembled with hurt. "Daniel is kind, educated, intelligent, and considerate. He cares so much about the future. What don't you like about him?" Her mother sighed, placing her cup on the table. She looked at her daughter with tenderness and a hint of sadness. "Emily, darling," she began apologetically, as if asking forgiveness for her feelings. "I don't know how to explain it. I just don't feel right about him. There's something about him that I can't quite grasp, but I sense it. A coldness, maybe." Coldness. Emily raised her eyebrows incredulously. Mum, he's just a serious person. He's not one for idle chatter. I understand that you're in love, darling, her mother said quietly, gazing into the distance. But trust me, a mother's heart rarely errs. This isn't what you've dreamed of. I know it. Please think it over first, don't rush. Don't make a mistake you can't undo. Her mother's words only fueled Emily's anger. She felt misunderstood, her feelings dismissed. I know what I want, and I'll do what I decide, Emily said sharply, rising from the table. Her eyes flashed. If you want to know, we're going to Daniel's country house tomorrow to meet his parents, and everything will be just perfect. You'll see. Her mother offered a weak smile, saying nothing, only shaking her head, her face etched with sorrow. Feeling terribly hurt and unfairly judged, Emily turned and stormed out of the kitchen. A moment later, the slam of her bedroom door echoed through the flat. Her mother sat alone in the silence, her gaze fixed on the untouched apple pie, a heavy maternal worry weighing on her heart. The morning dawned bright and sunny, promising a beautiful day. Waking up, Emily no longer dwelt on her mother's anxieties, or perhaps she had suppressed them so they wouldn't spoil this important day. In her heart, she was determined to prove to both herself and her mother that Daniel was the man she wanted to spend her life with. Emily got ready, carefully fixing her hair and applying light makeup, striving to look her best. Leaving the flat, she found Daniel already waiting for her outside, leaning against his car, his face glowing with anticipation. They drove out of the city. The August sun bathed the surrounding countryside. The roadside fields were already golden with ripe wheat, and overhead, the sky stretched endlessly blue. The road led them to a picturesque spot, far from the bustle of the city, to Daniel's parents' country home. Emily tried to focus only on the positive, imagining how lovely their time would be, how much she would like her new relatives, and how she would later tell her mother with a smile that she had been wrong. Daniel drove calmly and confidently. They spoke little, but at one point, he turned his head slightly towards Emily and said with a subtle, cautionary smile, Listen, my parents are, shall we say, particular. They have very strict standards at the country house. Everything has to be perfect. He paused briefly, then continued as if giving important instructions. Please try to stick to the paths. To avoid stepping on the lawns. And also, if you want to pick something from the bushes or trees, don't. They'll give you everything washed at the table. That's how we do things. Emily simply nodded, taking these words as charming quirks of older people accustomed to order. In her family, things were much simpler, but she thought that this meticulousness and these strict rules were just part of their comfortable life. It even amused her a little. See, she thought, what kind of people they are, everything in its place, nothing unnecessary. She looked forward to seeing this ideal country house that Daniel described with such pride. The car turned off the paved road onto a dirt track and stopped at high wrought iron gates. Beyond them, as far as the eye could see, stretched a perfectly manicured garden. Not a speck of dirt on the paved paths, not a single fallen leaf. It seemed the grass on the perfectly smooth lawn was all the same length, as if trimmed with scissors. Driving onto the property, Emily saw a sturdy summer house surrounded by flowers. Everything looked impeccable, almost unreal, like a picture from a gardening magazine. They were already expected. Daniel's father was doing something by the shed, and his mother was watering flowers near the house. As soon as the car stopped, they left their tasks and headed towards them. A sprightly elderly man with a straight posture and an authoritative gaze, Daniel's father, George, and a full-figured, chattering woman with a constantly smiling face, Daniel's mother, Jane. They surrounded the young couple with warm embraces, showering them with words of welcome. Jane chattered nonstop. Her voice was tinkling, but Emily, trying to gauge what kind of person she was, felt a strange detachment. She seemed welcoming, even sincere, but there was no real warmth. It felt like a perfectly tuned mechanism of hospitality rather than a heartfelt meeting. Remembering Daniel's instructions, Emily tried to be extremely careful. She stepped gingerly on the paved stone paths, admiring the bright flower beds. Not once did her hand reach out to the ripe apples hanging on the branches, nor to the bunches of ripe grapes entwining the gazebo. George and Daniel, meanwhile, began setting up a massive oak table right in the garden under a spreading apple tree. Jane deftly brought out dish after dish from the house. There were fresh vegetables, appetizing salads, homemade pastries, and succulent pieces of roast meat. "Jane, can I help with anything?" Emily asked, seeing Daniel's mother bustling about. Jane turned, waving her hand slightly, and replied, "No, dear, you're a guest, and guests shouldn't be setting the table. You'd better go with Daniel to admire our roses. They're in full bloom right now." Emily felt a slight awkwardness, but Daniel took her hand and led her towards the bushes with lush, vibrant flowers, and she obediently followed. At that moment, there was a tentative knock at the gate. Daniel's father turned, his face slightly frowning. A middle-aged man, probably a neighbor, stood by the gate, shifting uncomfortably from foot to foot. "George, sorry to bother you," the neighbor began, his voice pleading. "I've got a flat tire.
Can't get to town.
Could you lend me a pump to get it inflated enough to reach the garage?" Hearing this, Jane snorted disdainfully and, without turning her head, retorted, "Should have your own, instead of bothering the neighbors." George slowly walked to the gate and, without raising his voice but with an icy tone, said, "Did you hear? Now go away and don't disturb our rest." The neighbor lowered his eyes, muttered something, and turned to leave. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. She didn't have time to be surprised or comprehend what had happened before Daniel, sensing her discomfort, lightly took her hand, leading her deeper into the garden towards a beautiful carved gazebo covered in ivy. When the table was set, their parents called them over. Emily and Daniel sat at the massive oak table, which was already groaning under the weight of food. George gestured hospitably, inviting them to try the dishes, and began proudly talking about his harvest. "Here, Emily, try our crunchy, juicy cucumbers, and have you seen the tomatoes? All uniform in size. And all of this, mind you, without any chemicals, grown by our own labor. Every fruit is our money, our livelihood." Jane, with her unchanging smile, poured fragrant apple juice into the glasses and carefully placed fresh salad and pieces of roast meat on the plates. She nodded towards her husband, adding with pride, "Yes, my dear, we did all this with our own hands, didn't ask anyone for anything, and our Daniel is the best catch in the area. So hold on tight, dear, and you'll have everyone's respect." Daniel sat next to Emily, smiling slightly and hardly speaking, letting his parents lead the conversation. He only occasionally glanced at Emily, as if checking her reaction, and his gaze made her feel uneasy. Perhaps it was just a cool breeze running through the garden. Or maybe her mother's words from the previous day had crept into her heart like a worm, making her doubt the sincerity of their hospitality. Daniel himself, though smiling, was slightly detached. Perhaps it wasn't common in their family to show their feelings in front of others, Emily told herself. Suddenly, George sharply put down his fork, his gaze abruptly becoming predatory, fixed on something at the far end of the garden. He jumped up from the table, snarling, "I'll show you." He was surprisingly quick for his age. Heading into the garden, he grabbed a long, well-hewn stick that seemed to have been leaning against the wall of the house for just such occasions. Emily sat in complete confusion, not understanding what had happened. She looked at Daniel and Jane. However, apart from Emily, no one at the table seemed to pay any attention. Jane and Daniel continued to eat undisturbed. Emily, in utter bewilderment, slowly speared some salad with her fork, not quite understanding what was happening. Suddenly, a muffled squeak came from deep in the garden, followed by a sob. Emily tensed. Daniel and Jane looked up from their plates. A moment later, George appeared from behind the bushes. He was returning, and his appearance made Emily shudder. In one hand, he firmly held the stick, and in the other, he dragged a frightened boy of about 10 by the scruff of his neck. The child's ear was slightly red, and his eyes were full of tears. The boy sobbed, trying to break free, but George's grip was like steel. A cruel smirk played on his face. "Uh-huh, caught you, little thief," George roared, dragging the boy closer to the table. Thought you could hide, as always. Now show me what you've got there. The boy cringed, trying to cover his pocket, but George shook him unceremoniously. Several ripe, golden pears fell to the ground. Jane, who had been silent until now, suddenly perked up. Her face spread into a wide but unpleasant smile. Well, Daniel, she said sing-songly, looking at her son. You're the head of the future family. Show him who's boss here. How to deal with petty spongers. Let him know that you can't take what doesn't belong to you. Let him remember it for life. As if on cue, Daniel rose willingly. An expression appeared on his face that Emily had never seen before, a mixture of arrogance and a chilling coldness. He approached the boy, who was trembling with fear, and grabbed him by the ear. You'll steal from us, Daniel said, pulling the boy's ear upwards and hissing through his teeth. Understand what will happen if you trespass on our property again? We'll tear off all your ears.
The boy sobbed again.
Emily watched the scene, and her heart clenched with horror. It wasn't just punishment. It was the humiliation of a defenseless child. In the eyes of Daniel and his parents, she saw only the greedy fire of property owners, ready for anything for the sake of their harvest. All their feigned decency had crumbled, revealing a repulsive, cruel essence. Daniel. Emily's voice trembled with indignation. What are you doing?
Stop it.
Let him go. He's just a child. Hearing Emily's indignant voice, Jane turned to her. Her smile didn't disappear but became even colder and more patronizing. Don't interfere, dear. This is our business, she said. The neighbors' boys have become completely unruly, stealing our harvest. If we don't teach him a lesson now, he'll grow up to be a young criminal. Then she turned to her husband. George, take his trousers down. The boy screamed in terror. At that moment, something snapped in Emily. She looked at Daniel, whom she had loved, but saw him as an extension of these cruel, soulless people. It wasn't just stinginess, it was a deformity of the soul, hidden behind a show of prosperity. You're enjoying his suffering, Emily exclaimed. At that moment, Daniel turned to her. Their eyes met. In his eyes, she saw a cold, calculated cruelty, the same that had been hiding behind his polite smile. It wasn't the gaze of a loving person, but the gaze of a predator. Gathering all her will, Emily abruptly stood up. Her voice, initially trembling, became firm and loud, echoing through the quiet garden, drowning out the boys' sobs and the adults' disgusting laughter. This is wrong. I can't allow this. I can't bear the thought of you treating my children like this. I will not allow it. I will not marry you. Daniel and his parents fell silent abruptly, their faces contorted with shock and anger. They hadn't expected such resistance, such sharp condemnation from sweet Emily. At that very moment, the boy, as if sensing his chance, twisted out of the adult's clutches and darted towards Emily, hiding behind her. Without waiting for a response, Emily firmly took the boy's hand and resolutely headed towards the exit of the garden. Daniel's entire family remained standing in the middle of their immaculate lawn. The bewildered voice of George reached them. Where is she going? And then the snide, contemptuous voice of Jane, addressed to her son. Let her go, Daniel. She'll regret it and come back. Emily didn't turn around. She led the boy out of the high gates onto the country road. Making sure they were safe, she knelt in front of him. You have to understand that it's wrong to take what isn't yours, Emily said gently. See what can happen? You're lucky I was there, otherwise, these people would have skinned you alive. The boy, blinking his frightened eyes, whispered, Thank you, Auntie. I won't do it again. Run home quickly, Emily replied, gently pushing him. The boy, without looking back, dashed off down the road. Emily straightened up. She looked around, trying to get her bearings, and saw a small sign on the nearest house with a number and street name. Taking out her smartphone, she quickly called a taxi. Emily arrived home in the evening. Her mother greeted her with anxiety, but seeing her daughter's state, she immediately embraced her. Emily, holding back tears, breathlessly told her everything that had happened, about the false hospitality, the cruelty of Daniel and his parents towards the boy, and her decision. Her mother listened silently, stroking her hair. "You were right, Mum," Emily said, sobbing. "You saw everything, you felt everything, and I was so blind. Today I saw the real them. It was so awful, Mum. I couldn't stay there." Her mother sat her at the table, poured her a cup of warm tea with mint, and placed a plate with her favorite cake in front of her. "There, darling," her mother said softly and gently. "My heart felt that something wasn't right with him. But you know what I'll tell you, my dear? I'm proud of you, of your determination. You weren't afraid to break everything in an instant when you saw injustice. You stood up for your principles, for your conscience. That's worth a lot, and you're right. The main thing is that your man is kind, that he values others, not just himself. And a man like Daniel, with such a family, is not worth anything to you." Emily looked at her mother, and her soul felt so light, as if a stone had been lifted from her heart. Her mother's words were the best praise and the most sincere comfort. She nodded, wiping away her tears. They sat in the kitchen for a long time, talking about something of their own, familiar and warm. That evening, Emily not only found peace in her soul but also strengthened her bond with her mother, understanding that true love and support had always been there. She had no doubt that happiness with a worthy man awaited her. After all, Emily now knew exactly what kind of man she was looking for.